and expose its secret life force. A system of incredible complexity and technology that millions depend on, but few understand. A fantastic voyage now begins, a journey deep inside the world's megacities. They call it the Big Apple, the largest metropolis in America. 8 million people scattered across 5 boroughs, each a city in itself. The core of the Big Apple, the bustling borough of Manhattan. Like no place on Earth, New York is famed for its pace. Yet life here would slow to a crawl without one vital piece of infrastructure. Perhaps the most famous transportation system in the world. The New York subway. It's the engine that drives this megacity. 75% of New Yorkers have no car. They don't need one. New York has the best transit system in America. Yet the subway is a system under siege. Daily it faces a triple threat. From man, from nature, and from time. Count the perils, and the mind reels. 2/3 of the subway runs underground, under roads, under rivers, under skyscrapers. The system truly carries the weight of the city on its shoulders. Billions of tons of concrete and steel, asphalt and earth, all bearing down. Millions of liters of water threatening to flood in. A 100-year-old network struggling to keep up. And the most ominous number of all, 9/11. In these dark shadows, the specter of terrorism is no illusion. It's a nightmare New York survived and struggles daily to never relive. New York has a second nickname, the city that never sleeps. An insomniac metropolis in perpetual motion. Like the city, the subway never rests. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's the fastest way to get around. Average speed on asphalt, 10 kilometers per hour. Average speed on rails, 48 kilometers per hour. Conceived in the 19th century, it was the world's first subway with 4-track service. 2 local tracks, 2 express. No waiting. In a city choked by congestion, the subway was a breakthrough. From a single line, tentacles spread across the city to become the most extensive subway system on Earth. 27 lines run along 1,300 kilometers of track, enough to stretch from Rome to Amsterdam. Linking the system, 468 stations, more than any other system in the world. The system extends its reach through a complex web of infrastructure. 68 bridges over land and water. 14 tunnels under rivers. 2 key rail links. And one of the world's oldest ferries. Every working day, trains carry 4.5 million people, nearly the entire population of Norway, making it one of the world's busiest subway systems. Within this vital organ, life pulses at the speed of a New York minute. And every day, the city struggles to keep it beating and keep it safe. To outsiders, this megacity can seem one big, faceless metropolis. To New Yorkers, it's a vast patchwork of neighborhoods, each with its own identity, all linked by these precious threads of steel. Abe Monhass has been a motorman for 21 years. Today he's driving his favorite route, the number 3 line.
I think it's one of the nicest lines in the system. Just moving through the city, Harlem, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Chinatown.
His route takes him through some of the world's most famous real estate. Central Park, a green oasis in an asphalt jungle. Broadway, theater capital of the world. The Empire State Building, the world's most famous skyscraper. Greenwich Village, America's haven for bohemians. Wall Street, New York's bastion of finance. And a plot of hallowed ground, the open grave of the World Trade Center. Since the first line opened 100 years ago, the subway and the city have shared a single fate. Their history runs on the same track. Whatever lies ahead, city and subway will falter or prosper as one. Yet for the motormen who drive the trains, it's no joyride.
One of the biggest misconceptions of this job is that it's very easy. You have to pay very, very close attention to every little detail.
Every motorman shares the same motto: safety first. They're forever on the lookout for danger, from hazards large or small, mechanical or man-made. Every workday starts with a safety inspection, because on a system this big and this busy, the devil is in the details.
I check it from top to bottom, all the cabs, everything, make sure the doors work, make sure the brake system works.
If Abe finds anything wrong, he has the power to prevent a train from going into service.
My main job is the safe movement of that train. I have a lot of people in my hands. It can be a little nerve-wracking sometimes.
On the subways of New York, train operators collide with a dilemma: an inflexible schedule and an unpredictable metropolis.
We are expected to be perfect every single day. You're dealing with millions of people, and all it takes is one person to delay everything. It could be a sick passenger. It could be a crime.
Just because his train disappears underground doesn't mean trouble won't follow. On a normal day, Abe's biggest concern isn't terrorists, it's his fellow citizens.
New York is New York. We have crime up here and down there, just like we do in the streets. Anything that happens in the street happens in the subway.
The subway also carries its own built-in hazards. In 1991, 5 people were killed and more than 200 injured when a train derailed in Manhattan. In 2000, 66 people were injured when another train derailed in Brooklyn. Accidents on the subway are like farms in Manhattan, a rarity. Yet no motorman can take the throttle without looking over his shoulder at the disasters that struck other systems. 1975. A crowded rush-hour train crashes into a dead end on the London Underground. 43 people die. 1995. The worst subway disaster in history. In the capital of Azerbaijan, a crowded subway train catches fire in a tunnel. Some 300 people perish. Then there's terrorism. French police blame radical Muslims for a 1995 attack on the Paris metro. Russian police suspect terrorists in the 2004 bombing of the Moscow subway. Perhaps the most frightening, the deadly sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway that sent thousands to the hospital and 12 to their grave. And then came 9/11. It drove the message home.
My main job is the safe movement of that train.
Along these rails, New York stands guard for danger. On a beautiful Indian summer morning, it struck from the most unlikely quarter, right out of the clear blue sky. An unprecedented catastrophe that stopped New York in its tracks. People remember two kinds of images from 9/11. This is the other one. Hundreds of thousands of subway riders walking for safety, walking for home, walking anywhere. In the wake of the terrorist attack on New York's World Trade Center, the world's biggest subway system shut down. All day long, the whole world watched the horror unfolding above ground. No one saw what happened below. A transit catastrophe. When the Twin Towers fell, the collateral damage took out the Cortlandt Street subway station. Almost 430 meters of tunnel destroyed. 4 subway lines severed. Passengers escaped, but 3 trains were crushed under a mountain of rubble. But this is New York, the city that never sleeps and never stops moving. Before the day was over, New York began drafting plans to restore service and rebuild. Dusting off blueprints from 1915, architects designed a new station. It took months just to clear the rubble. Experts said it would take years to rebuild. They were wrong. 1 year and 4 days after 9/11, all 4 subway lines had reopened. A triumph in the wake of tragedy. But at Ground Zero itself, the transit system was still digging out from under. The station hit hardest lay 5 floors beneath the World Trade Center. End of the line for the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Corporation, the PATH train. From terminals in Newark and Hoboken, the railway crosses the Hudson River via 2 tunnels. One line runs to the Penn Station subway stop, the other to the World Trade Center. PATH is one of the world's smallest railways, just 23 kilometers. But it links northern New Jersey to all 1,300 kilometers of the New York subway system. Each day, the trains make hundreds of trips, carrying almost 200,000 commuters. Like the subway, PATH trains stay in perpetual motion.
I mean, some people come from other places and they tell me, oh, what time do I have to be back from the city? You know, but what time do you, was your last? I said, we run 24 hours. Passengers with backpacks.
Bob Garcia has been a PATH conductor for 2 decades.
Also, passengers. I enjoy being in the car with the passengers, and I think the passengers feel a lot safer too. You have to remember, since 9/11, things have changed. We lost our innocence because now any little delays, anything that happens on our system, passengers tend to look up.
Every day, Garcia pulled into the PATH station beneath the Twin Towers.
World Trade Center is our final stop. It was a city within a city. You had over 50,000 people. You were so alive when you were down here. Where you would see it mostly is when you came out for lunch on a beautiful day, when everyone was coming out of the buildings. And then, of course, you would sometimes look up and see these majestic mountains just staring down at you.
Then came 9/11.
The only way you can describe it is like a death in the family.
The collapse of the World Trade Center's South Tower obliterated the PATH station. The station is the lowest point on the Trade Center site. All the water from fighting the fires poured in. Broken water mains flooded the PATH tunnel all the way to New Jersey. Workers built a temporary plug to seal the tunnel. It took 40 days to pump all the water out. A crucial link to the subway system was destroyed. Now began the hard work, rebuilding. An unprecedented feat of transit engineering. Workers gutted 1.5 kilometers of tunnels. They replaced ties, track, ductwork and strung almost 100 kilometers of cable. All the while, other crews worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, to rebuild the entire station from scratch. In November 2003, the station reopened, the first public space to open on the Trade Center site since 9/11. Workers finished the job 1 month ahead of schedule.
Said it couldn't be done, but it was done.
Yet the real work has just begun. This station is only temporary. From unprecedented tragedy has emerged a rare opportunity, the chance to reinvent the ancient infrastructure at the heart of a modern megacity. This gaping hole is destined to become a thriving hub.
We are going to build a new transit center here, and that is the first terminal that Lower Manhattan will have.
Charles Gargano is vice chairman of the Port Authority. His vision of a new PATH station is destined to link up with another bold transformation just blocks away. With more than 250,000 entries, exits and transfers each day, Fulton Street is the busiest subway station in Lower Manhattan. It's also the most confusing, a subterranean jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces don't fit. The Fulton Street subway station is actually a complex of 6 stations, built over 3 decades, to serve 12 competing subway lines, each fighting for passengers. Discouraging transfers between lines was deliberately built in. For almost a century, commuters groped through this transit nightmare. Then it got worse. When the PATH train station was built, no one envisioned a link to Fulton. The result? 2 key rail hubs and no connection. Now comes a multi-billion-dollar operation to untangle veins and unclog arteries, to smooth transfers among subway lines and tunnel a direct connection between the subway and the trains. Stations will be consolidated into one vast hub. Connections will be direct. Moving walkways will flow from one system to the next. In turn, the new PATH hub will forge direct connections to buses, ferries, and subway lines. It's no mere facelift, it's major surgery to close a gaping wound and put a shattered puzzle back together. Slated for completion by 2009, this grand central station has a grand price tag, $2 billion. In the eyes of the beholders, it's money well spent for a city in perpetual motion.
And they will have an ease of moving from location to location, from transit system to transit system. That's the ultimate goal.
Ease of movement is the very purpose of the subway and its genius. Sooner or later, the tracks end, but not the connections. By linking to every other transit system in New York, the subway extends its reach far beyond the end of the line. Just blocks from the PATH station, the subway system jumps the track and connects with a New York institution.
Security, Guy Molinari, changing slips in St. George.
Isolated in New York Harbor, Staten Island is the only borough in New York with no subway. But 5 miles away on Manhattan, Staten Island meets the subway at the Whitehall station. The link? The famed Staten Island Ferry. It takes you down to the water's edge and beyond. Every weekday, 5 boats move the equivalent of a large town. 104 daily trips. 70,000 passengers per day, 20 million people a year. Like the subway, the ferry runs 24 hours and never takes a holiday. Unlike the subway, it's free. It's New York's most reliable form of mass transit. more than 96% of the trips run on schedule, despite sleet, snow, fog, and traffic.
New York Harbor is one of the busiest harbors in the world, and of course the Staten Island Ferry is operating right in the middle of New York Harbor.
James DeSimone is Chief Operations Officer of the Staten Island Ferry. Today he makes the crossing on the pride of his fleet, the Guy V. Molinari. It's bigger than his older ferries. Each trip, up to 4,400 lives are in his hands, about as many as 4 subway trains. Safety is at a premium. As it moves through New York's crowded harbor, the Molinari carries an electronic life preserver, the collision avoidance system. In real time, it constantly tracks the name, position, and course of every vessel in the harbor. Life-saving data when the fog rolls in and the harbor turns to pea soup. It keeps this critical link from sinking. Within half an hour, the ferry connects with the subway at the tip of Manhattan and puts commuters back on track. For most of its history, Lower Manhattan was as isolated as Staten Island. The oldest part of New York, it was an island unto itself, marooned between the Hudson River and the East River, cut off from the other boroughs. Today, a network of bridges and tunnels links Manhattan to the rest of the city and extends the reach of the subway to the farthest corners of the Big Apple. These links form the backbone of the subway system. If they break, the entire system shatters into fragments. Among the biggest links, the Manhattan Bridge. On its outside lanes, it carries the subway over the East River, between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Dr. Bojidar Yanev is an engineer for the city of New York. His job, safeguarding the bridge, not against terrorism, but time.
A bridge like this is like a machine. There is always something you need to fix, to oil, to repaint, to clean, and possibly to replace.
The Manhattan Bridge needed major repairs at a relatively early age. The threat came from the very trains it was built to carry. Held in place by steel cables, the Manhattan has the advantages and drawbacks of a suspension bridge. One advantage, it can flex. One drawback, it can flex. That drawback emerged when the first subway train crossed. As the heavy cars pass, the bridge sways. One side dips, the other rises, a full meter. Steel isn't made to flex. The relentless torsion snapped off beams spanning the lower roadway. The Manhattan Bridge was so neglected, the tracks finally had to be closed for repairs. In the 1980s, the city invested $2.5 billion in a 3-decade program to overhaul its bridges. On the Manhattan Bridge, engineers installed heavy steel braces to stop the swaying.
The effect was surprising even to us. The rocking motion really abated.
Thanks to major surgery, the bridge survived. So the subway rolls on. Bridges and tunnels take the subway far beyond the confines of Manhattan. But with reach comes risk. The bigger the system, the more chances for failure. Risk looms within and without. The subway winds through New York neck and neck with water mains and power lines. A breakdown in another system can ripple into the subway. Above ground, track is vulnerable to the elements, sleet, snow, and the warping of summer heat. Below ground, the ever-present danger of flooding. Throughout the system, the unforeseen hazards of random accidents. Like a tumor unnoticed, an isolated problem can magnify into a malignant growth. In this vital organ, the best defense is early detection. To spot trouble, the Transit Authority relies on its frontline lookouts.
We're their eyes and ears, because we're the ones that are out here. So if I see a fire on this track, they don't see that. I see it, so I call out control. We have a smoke condition, track 4, Junior Street.
Every day, fate taunts the New York subway. On the nation's oldest and busiest system, the relentless foes are age and wear. Quietly, thousands of workers fight back, repairing track, overhauling trains, battling floods, in a daily struggle to bypass disaster. On the New York subway, a crisis unfolds. 1,000 passengers, a rookie motorman, and faulty brakes.
That's a copy of 1520, bypass 42nd Street.
Control center. Come in, control center.
1238 Woodbine. Come into the control center.
I have brakes in emergency.
This may be the world's most expensive video game. It's where motormen learn to drive a train, a simulator that mimics reality with chilling accuracy.
If you don't get the train operator to believe he or she's in the real world, you're not going to do any training.
From this control room, Rocco Cortese oversees New York's toughest driver's ed course. From a break in the power to a body on the track to a bomb scare, the real world can throw anything at them. So can the instructors.
She could throw a fire, she could throw a flood, she could throw snow. This way it keeps the train operator always guessing what's going to happen, and he gets the best training.
Want me to stop it? 1238 Woodbine is your train recharge.
Training happens inside a $4.5 million classroom. A high-tech projector throws real train footage onto a giant plate of glass.
The train operator has a big view, and this is very critical to make sure that the train operator feels that he or she's in the actual simulation.
Students take control of a 1-ton cab mounted on a pivoting base that mimics the motion of a moving train.
This is an important part of this simulator because without motion, the simulator is worthless to us.
The base rides on 6 computer-controlled shock absorbers. For stability, the entire platform is anchored in 75 centimeters of concrete.
Okay, now that we've seen the simulator, why don't we take a trip to Brooklyn on this simulator? Okay, Frank, take it away.
Every motorman strives for the brass ring of train driving, motionless motion. The subway runs on an irony. A perfect ride goes unnoticed.
I try to operate my train like a 10-car limousine, and I have a bridal party on it. And they're about to have champagne, and I don't want nobody's dress or tuxedo to get wet. So I try to do smooth stops and smooth takeoffs, and just get people where they're going. And that's it.
A motorman is only as good as his train. That's where Abe comes in. At day's end, when he reaches the end of the line, he still makes one more stop, the dispatcher's office.
I'm there in case a train comes in that's vandalized or dirty or it has mechanical difficulty. They'll say, "Hey, do me a favor, take that to the yard."
The yard is the Coney Island Overhaul Complex. It's a legend unto itself. The largest train repair shop in North America. It sprawls across 30 hectares, a third of them enclosed. 7 days a week, in round-the-clock shifts, a small army of 750 workers toils to keep the trains running. It's serious business. The cars carry millions of lives every day, and each life rests in these hands. The transit system has 6,500 cars, the largest fleet in the world. Each year, the entire fleet logs 558 million kilometers, nearly 4 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Today's car, a self-propelled model of mass transit, the biggest and safest car ever to ride these rails. The newest model is 15.5 meters long and weighs 32 tons. Its main components, a passenger cab and 2 steel trucks. It draws power through 4 contact shoes, 2 on each side, but interconnected. When one shoe touches the electrified third rail, all 4 are hot. Power flows to 4 115 horsepower motors, powerful enough to accelerate a sports car from 0 to 100 in 4 seconds. With power on, the motors push at full strength, but the train's speed is controlled by resisting the push of the motors. To stop the train, resistance increases. Only within the last 5 meters does the motorman activate the brake shoes and pads. Keeping the entire car on the rails, a steel lip invented 2 centuries ago. And still holding fast. From the wheels to the roof, the Coney Island yard can repair every single part. And every single day, it does. Every car that comes in gets the equivalent of an annual physical to ensure nothing goes from bad to worse.
We have a saying here, you don't want to pay for the same real estate twice. So if a car comes in, you want to do as much and the best job as possible the first time, this time, so there won't be a next time.
Greg Lombardi is the main superintendent. He runs his shop like a giant toy, a $1 billion toy.
I always told everybody it's like having my own personal train set. When things, unexpected breakdowns occur, we go out and we troubleshoot.
Overhead!
The shop's workhorses are 4 30-ton cranes, indispensable for moving a car from one workstation to another.
Ready? Hold!
This weighs 28 tons, so it's nothing to fool around with.
One wheel alone weighs more than 350 kilograms. An entire wheel and axle assembly weighs nearly a ton. And they're constantly on the move. They can do anything, from repairing a single part to rebuilding an entire car. Frame, motors, gears, axles, wheels, brakes, all within 40 hours. When they take a car apart for a major overhaul, the shop works like a race driver's pit crew, all at once. But the scale is bigger, the stakes higher. While one crew repairs axles, another replaces brake shoes. The goal? Get the cars in and out as fast as possible. When the mechanical crews finish, the cosmeticians take over. Coney Island washes these cars more often than most people wash their own. Every week, 1,000 cars pass through one of the world's biggest car washes.
Back in the day when graffiti would plague the fleet, we'd have to run them through a lot more. That was when the cars were painted. Nowadays, as you can see, they're stainless steel, easy to clean, easy to maintain, no painting required. So let this one come in, little dull, and they'll come out nice and shiny.
Shiny and safe. The goal of New York itself. 3 decades ago, both the city and the subway shared a bad reputation. Dirty, unsafe, and no place to be. New York cleaned up its image partly by cleaning up the subway. At the Coney Island yard, they do more than keep the trains running. They keep the Big Apple polished.
No job too small, no job too big, lifetime guarantee. How can you beat it? Send us your troubles.
On the subway, keeping cars safe is only half the equation. The system has more than 2,600 switches to move trains from one track to another, and more than 11,000 signals to control train traffic. The equipment is older than most New Yorkers. Much of it was installed before 1940. Altogether, more than 13,000 chances for something to go fatally wrong. New York can't take that chance. To sidetrack a catastrophe, maintenance workers go looking for trouble every day. To find it, the crew themselves must venture into harm's way. They work in a black hole, beside live rails, with trains bearing down just centimeters away. This is the track simulation room. 46 meters of subway, recreated down to the last wire, tie, and bolt. The only difference, these rails are lifeless. In the field, they carry a lethal dose of electricity, 600 volts. With crews working centimeters from death, accuracy counts. Bob Dorino is one of the instructors.
Students get a chance to take apart their equipment, to adjust their equipment, to get a true feel for what they're going to experience when they're out in the real world doing the actual job of keeping New York City safe.
The workers keep the signal system running, and the signal system keeps the trains running safely. It works through modern electronics and old-fashioned mechanics. All tracks are divided into 300-meter sections called blocks that electrically detect the presence of a train. When a train enters the block, it passes over a set of insulated joints in the rails. The wheels short-circuit the joints and activate a signal to regulate traffic behind the train. If the train maintains speed, the signal remains green. If the train slows down, the signal changes to yellow. If the train stops, the signal changes to red. At the same time, a life-saving backup is automatically activated. A T-shaped device at track level called a trip. Its purpose? Avert a collision. If the next train misses or ignores the red signal, the trip will catch it. When the train passes over, a safety lever beneath the carriage strikes the trip and engages the brakes. When the signal turns yellow or green, the trip lowers, and the tracks are clear to proceed. Signals work in tandem with the equipment that safely moves a train from one track to another, the switch. The movable rails are called switch points. They guide a train down one track or the other through the simplest of technology.
The train has a flange that hangs down from one side of the wheel. This flange rides on the innermost part of the rail. As the train moves along the track, the flange would then grab this portion of the rail and be guided accordingly.
One mistake, the trains could derail or collide. It demands a foolproof system, a mechanism that forbids both mischief and error. It's called an interlocking machine. Each lever on the machine corresponds to a signal or switch on the track. The failsafe in the machine is a set of steel bars that give the machine its name. They interlock, allowing safe movements and forbidding unsafe movements. The flawless logic of the interlocking machine heads off two of the worst threats to the subway system: derailment and collision. But just beneath the surface, another threat lurks, and another machine toils. Two networks that crisscross Manhattan. One, a man-made network of tracks and stations. The other, a natural network of streams and springs. A century ago, to build the subway, engineers had to pump out billions of liters of groundwater. They're still pumping. On average, New York City stands just 1 meter above sea level. 60% of the subway system runs underground. The lowest station lies 55 meters below street level. Throughout the system, water everywhere. The flow never ends. It comes from rainfall, groundwater, and water main breaks. If it seeps into subway tunnels and touches the electrified third rail, it can disrupt the signals and trigger a disaster. To avert danger, the Transit Authority mans nearly 300 pumps throughout the subway system, 24 hours a day. The 4 pumps in this room alone can churn out 15,000 liters a minute. On an average day, the pump rooms throughout New York disgorge 49 million liters of water, enough to fill 50 Olympic swimming pools. The water flows into underground sumps, then into the sewers, keeping the subway high and dry. Yet, on this system, the tracks aren't clear. Ahead lies an obstacle. Not natural, but man-made. And a man-made problem requires a superhuman solution. Sometimes New York is its own worst enemy. On America's busiest subway, a bulging artery threatens to hemorrhage. The threat comes not from nature or time, but man. Too many people. Now, relief is coming down the tracks. The fabled 2nd Avenue subway. In the boom years after World War II, change swamped Manhattan's East Side. Factories closed, offices opened, and condominiums sprouted. To make room for progress, the city tore down 2 elevated subways. As the decades passed, the population exploded, swamping the East Side's sole subway line. For decades, New Yorkers talked of building another line running north and south along 2nd Avenue. Work was begun, but when New York teetered on bankruptcy in the 1970s, construction stopped. Finally, help's coming. The first subway line to be built since 1940, a 13-kilometer stretch from 125th Street to the financial district in Lower Manhattan. It won't be completed until 2020, but a glimpse of the subway of the future has already been unveiled.
Well, you can see the Atlantic Ocean behind me, and I'm surrounded by an ocean of glass here.
Rich Maris manages the Stillwell Terminal project on Coney Island. With 8 tracks, it's the biggest subway terminal in the world. It's also one of the oldest in the New York system. Over the past 2 decades, the Transit Authority has renovated almost half its stations. But when Stillwell's turn came, it was judged beyond repair. Instead, they tore it down and started over. This is tomorrow's terminal today. 4 subway lines terminate at Stillwell. Each was once covered by a small canopy that failed to protect trains and passengers from the elements. No more. Stillwell now shelters beneath a roof the size of a football field. But this roof does far more than keep commuters dry. It powers the station. The roof is made of 2,600 photovoltaic panels. Every year, each solar-powered panel generates enough electricity to power an average household for 3 days. Together, they'll generate half the station's daily electricity. It's one of the best uses of solar power in any subway on Earth. The roof is not just economical, it's safe. Engineers test the panels by firing a 2x4 from a projectile gun at 160 kilometers per hour, simulating the debris of a hurricane.
They will not break. They fracture, but they won't go through. This roof is strong enough to handle your weight. You can walk all over the glass if you want to.
You have to. To avoid disruptions on the platforms below, the roof was designed to be maintained from above. Like arteries in a body, the subway ensures the health of its host. As the station comes back to life, it may revive an ailing limb of this megacity.
Back in the early 1900s, Coney Island was probably the original version of what Disney World is today. Everyone came here. This was a city of lights. This roof now has started the return of Coney Island.
An entire neighborhood moves forward because Stillwell is back on track. Man, nature, and time all throw obstacles in its path. Hazards loom around the bend. Yet the subway always comes through, a well-oiled machine in perpetual motion, speeding to the service of a restless metropolis.
The system works. It works very, very well. And when there's a time of crisis, we pull together like nobody else does.
It's all about pressure and time. How much pressure can you take over a certain amount of time? Some people rise to the occasion, some fold under the pressure, so to speak.
We all need reassurances nowadays, you know. It's a different world.
Once in a while, I take a peek through my window, and I see everybody very relaxed. Sometimes you see people sleeping, a whole carload of people sleeping. They feel safe. If they didn't feel like that, they wouldn't be asleep.
Rocked to sleep, safe inside this metal cocoon. The city that never sleeps finally rests.